All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our second spring session for our teachers. I will share my screen to share the agenda, and then we will get started. Okay, so this is our second session of the spring, and we're really thrilled that we have David Bryfman with us as our guest this morning. For those of you who don't know, David is the CEO at the Jewish Education Project in New York. It's the sort of central institution that services all of Jewish education, both in New York and really has been a beacon and a thought leader for those of us in the field for many, many years. And David's writing and his presence in the community of Jewish educators has been really very, very inspiring for many of us. And we're really thrilled that he agreed to be with us this morning. So I hope, can everyone see the agenda? So we'll do our Hineni moment in a minute. And here comes Amalia, other people are coming in. And then we'll do a little bit of study, and then I'll turn it over to David. Welcome, Amalia, good to see you this morning. Mazel tov on the new announcement.
Thank you.
Amalia just got a nice promotion at Mayim Chaim. We're happy for her. All righty. So as has been our practice, we're going to take a minute just to sort of take a big deep breath in and out to let go of anything that is hampering us this morning and to really be present for this morning's session. So if everyone could just do a big breath in and a breath out and make a commitment to be present, Hineni, for this morning. Thank you. All right, we're going to do a short Kavanah study this morning. I prepared this Sefaria sheet. I will put the link in the chat. Oh, and here's Roberta now. Oops, I put the wrong thing in the chat. Don't go to that link. I mean, you can, but not for our purposes this morning. Okay, the right link is now in the chat for the Sefaria sheet. Good morning, Roberta. Welcome. Nice to see everybody. All right, so we're going to do a short little study to focus ourselves for the topic this morning. If everyone, have people opened up that Sefaria sheet yet? So the quote that's on the screen right now is from the Megillah, from Megillat Esther, and it's on the sheet as well, of course. Do you want me to share the sheet, or do people have it open on their screen? You want me to share it, Andrea? Okay. So hold on, let me do that. If that makes it easier for everybody, hold on, let me just get it over to the right place. Okay, how are we doing? Does everyone see that? Okay, so what I've done this morning is I've chosen 3 of our main characters in our canon, and obviously anchoring it in Megillat Esther as we are coming off of the heels of Purim and obviously into the countdown or count up to Pesach and then Shavuot, and God willing, spring and vaccines and all kinds of good things to be coming in the coming months. Who wants to read this first pasuk? Go ahead, Roberta.
I don't want to read in Hebrew, though. I should have studied.
That's fine.
Read in English, right?
Totally
okay.
Fine.
Esther 4:14. On the contrary, if you keep silent in this crisis, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another quarter, while you and your father's house will perish. And who knows, perhaps you have attained to royal position for just such a crisis.
Great, thank you. So any thoughts about this, especially that half of the pasuk that I've highlighted and that's on that's on the screen there. Any thoughts about what that's about, and where, what are you curious about with that? What do you notice? What do you wonder about?
So I've always liked the idea of, who knows, maybe this is your moment and this is your time. But I never noticed the second part of the sentence before that, which is, if you don't do this, the Jews are going to survive some other way, but not you. Like, you're in trouble. And I think that's interesting. Like, she's threatened to do this. And I never really read it that way before.
Mm-hmm. Nice observation. Yep. Hold on one second, please. Keep looking. Hold on. Sorry, everybody. Okay. Go ahead, Heidi.
So I think, to me, it points to the importance of our positions, whether we're presidents, whether we're educators, whether we're queens. There's a lot of responsibility there, and we have to make use of every opportunity to make changes if we're able to.
Yeah. Any other wonderings, observations about that? Just unmute. Go ahead.
I don't know. The crisis part speaks to me for where we are in our world right now. I mean, I think potentially Jewish education is in crisis. We've all pivoted wonderfully, but like bigger picture, having everybody home in these little boxes certainly poses challenges, and for sure the world is in crisis. But we have kind of attained like royal position. Like, I think religious schools were, I mean, I'll speak for the Boston area, like we were among the first online. And I know so many of us heard from our families, this is my kids' only synchronous learning right now. You all have been amazing. Like, we're experimenting with various in-person pieces. So not to like put us on a pedestal, because I don't really, I'm not in the business of putting us on a pedestal, but it's just like, it kind of speaks to, I think, where we're at right now in Jewish education.
Thanks, Roberta. Thank you. Great. So yes, I mean, I think that this sentence has a lot of resonance for so many of the challenges that we have faced in these last 12 months. Not just the health crisis, not just the isolation crisis, not just the equity crisis, but whatever's going on, even in your own personal world, whatever's going on for you in your professional world, there are so many things that, who knows, maybe this is the time that we were called to be here. So I think that Kim, go ahead.
Yeah, I actually I've been playing with that, and who knows, perhaps part of the statement. In my mind, I thought I've always read it as being more definitive. You were put in this place for this purpose. And this is, I think, for me, making it more of a choice, if that makes sense. That we're not quite sure, but we can lift up to do this important work. And I hadn't read it before, hadn't thought of it as being not quite as defined as, yes, this is your purpose.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
I'm also thinking about what it means to be pushed into something and have to rise to the occasion. Like, in some ways, I really read this as manipulative. Like, it feels icky to be like cornered like this.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we speak to people in ways that they can hear it? Because this moment, she really did need to stand up. And so maybe like this kindness wouldn't have pushed her forward. And so kind of like what motivates people to act in what way.
Great. Thanks, Amalia. And I can't remember, was it Amy? Someone said also this sort of like this undercurrent of a threat almost. So there is something kind of uncomfortable about it. I want to share two other examples of other people in our tradition from the Tanakh who approached things. Hi, Shari. Good morning. Who approached things at a particular moment in particular ways. So the next example I have is Rebecca, our matriarch. And this is from the part of the story where Abraham has sent his servant to go find a bride for Yitzhak, and he comes across this woman at the well. Anyone want to read these few pasukim? Anyone willing to do that? Go ahead, Andrea. Sherry, I'm going to mute you, okay?
Can you just scroll it up a little bit? Scroll it back to the beginning.
Yep.
Okay. So again, in the English, right?
Whatever you're comfortable with.
Okay. Drink, my lord, she said, and she quickly lowered her jar upon her hand and let him drink. When she had let him drink his fill, she said, I will also draw for your camels until they finish drinking. Quickly emptying her jar into the trough, she ran back to the well to draw, and she drew for all his camels.
And then the next shorter pasuk.
And she went on. There is plenty of straw and feed at home, and also room to spend the night.
Okay, so this is the moment where she's also at a moment of making some choice actions and moves that become pivotal in the story. And we see here these actions that she takes. So I do want to make some observations and curiosities and wonderings about these pasukim, how Rivka behaves, what she does.
Well, she's playing the role of caregiver, which is what we're all doing in different respects.
Great observation, Heidi. Great observation. Other thoughts about Rivka, our matriarch?
I think she seems very natural in this role.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say, she's being proactive. She's not waiting to be asked or something. She's offering, I'm going to feed your, I'm going to water your camels. And by the way, there's a place for you at our house.
Yeah, I actually intentionally wanted to add that second pasuk, which comes the first one, the first section ends at 20, and then this is verse 24, because I think we often think of that the sort of the pivotal moment is her bringing the water for the camels. But then, yes, it's also more and more, because it maybe is her natural inclination. I'm watching the time a little, so I'm going to move to Moshe. Just as a third example of the pivotal moments and choice points. So anyone want to offer to read the Pesukim for Moshe? Amalia, are you about to unmute? No, okay.
I'll read.
Go ahead, thanks, Heidi.
But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and free the Israelites from Egypt? But Moses spoke up and said, what if they do not believe me and do not listen to me, but say, the Lord did not appear to you? But Moses said to the Lord, please, O Lord, I have never been a man of words, either in times past or now that you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and slow of tongue.
Right, so these are three moments at again, the pivotal sort of choice point where Moses is being asked by God at the burning bush. So what do we know about Moses, and what do we see in these Pesukim about his choices and his personality and how he approaches the choice point?
His uncertainty and his nervousness about the task at hand.
Yeah, I think there is that real sense of fear and nervousness. Yes, I love that you use that word, Andrea. All right, what I wanted to share these is, I think that these are three like really interesting examples of ways that people can and do react during times of stress and crisis. There's three of many, obviously, and these are all great literary examples also of how characters and the sort of the typography of characters. And we have three really interesting examples here. what I thought we could do, and again, I am watching the time and I want to give David a good half hour, but I thought just to sort of anchor yourself for a minute and change your name to who are you feeling most like this morning? Esther, Rivka, or Moshe? Who do you think, which part are you tapping into that either being threatened to do something, you better act, or just sort of feeling like the acknowledgement of I have to act, or the Rivka of I'm a natural caregiver, or this is just what I do and I just click into action and everything moves ahead, or the Moshe of being totally fearful and concerned and hesitant. And again, these are three sort of top, this is the top line interpretation of these three. There's plenty more to study here with these three, but just take a minute, and I'd love for people to change their names. Thank you, Michael, Rivka, Esther. Let's see, who else? A lot of Esthers, okay. A lot of, okay, beautiful. Thank you so much for studying this together with me this morning. I hope that you might find these three typologies interesting and potentially useful with your staff, with your students, and something to take home with you. I am going to turn over to David now, and thank you all for focusing us this morning on our moment where we are. So David, it's you.
Good morning, everybody. Good to see you all. It's interesting that I think I do need to preface this. I had a chance to study these psukim from Esther with Dr. Erica Brown in the last couple of weeks, and it was interesting because we asked the question. I was very taken by Amalia's, particularly her response to this pasuk here. Was Mordechai threatening? Was it icky? Or was Mordechai the man in her life giving her permission to actually stand up when she was least inclined to do so? And I was made very acutely aware of what it was like for a man to be giving permission for a woman to be the one to stand up. And here I am, along with Michael, as male identifying Jewish educators in a field which is predominantly filled with female Jewish educators. And I wonder how many of you are in situations where you're often or put in a position where you're asking males for permission to do something in the space of Jewish education. And I'm just aware this verse makes me acutely aware of some of the gender dynamics in Jewish education, which is just worth exploring. And maybe that is the future of Jewish education in some ways, and the topic of what we're talking about, or at least part of it. So I use that as almost like a tangent, but I think as a way to set up that this topic is fraught about the future of Jewish education post the pandemic in so many ways. Last year, when we sat there preparing for Pesach, we all said, let's prepare for a Zoom Pesach, or let's prepare for a digital Pesach, knowing that we'll never have to do it again. But it's a one-off thing that we can just experiment. And now here we are, right? It's after Purim, and we're now thinking about Pesach. I'm not going to be so pessimistic as to suggest we're going to be next Purim doing the same thing, but I am interested just to ask you for like 30 seconds. Is there one element from your Purim celebrations of the past weekend or week that you think are going to continue once we get back to normal? Is there anything that you did this year in Purim that actually you might have struck upon a bit of gold that's actually maybe not exactly the same thing, but something that you did, which you said, even if we do go back to normal next year, I want to continue this as part of my Purim ritual, my Purim celebration. So is anyone brave enough to give a couple of examples?
I'll go.
Yes, Heidi. And just introduce yourself, where you're from. I just don't know many.
Heidi Smith-Hyde. I'm the Director of Education of Temple Sinai in Brookline, Coolidge Corner. And one very nice thing we did for the first time to create community was we had a mystery Mordechai project. So everybody who participated got to be their mystery Mordecai and deliver a special bag of goodies. And it just made everybody feel so connected to be the giver as well as the receiver. So I think that's definitely something we will carry forth into next year, wherever
Thanks,
we
Heidi.
are.
Thank you. Somebody else. Yes, Roberta.
Hi, my name is Roberta. I work at Temple Israel of Boston. We did a drive around the Boston Brookline area treasure hunt spiel for Purim, and it was really, really fun. Everyone was masked, so it was safe, but I could imagine like doing something like that where people have a little bit more freedom.
Great. Great. Maybe one other person. Yes, Amalia.
Hi, I'm Amalia. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Director of Programs and Partnerships at Mayim Chaim, a community mikveh in Newton, Massachusetts. I'm in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I'm thinking about the mishloach manot that I got from people that were so low key. I loved it. It was like not about keeping up with the Joneses or the Cohens or whatever. It was about, this is where we are, this is what I can give, and this like humble offering is enough. And it was so much what I want to see in the coming years of people focusing away from like, how much can I make the most perfect mishloach manot and costumes, and towards a like, how are we connecting with each other on this holiday?
Great. Thank you. And I don't mean to brag, but we stumbled upon something at the Jewish Education Project this year. I put $18 into everybody's paycheck extra this month, and asked everybody to pay it forward to a non-profit tzedakah of their choice for matanot le'evyonim, giving to the poor. And then at our Purim Seudah, which was virtually online, everybody went around and described who they gave their money to, why they gave their money to that organization. And more than 50% of our staff increased what we gave them to pay it forward to their group as well. And for us, matanot le'evyonim had always been, let's say, the fourth of the mitzvot. Yeah, we read the Megillah well, we gave mishloach manot well, we had a good feast. And by the way, $18 a person actually cost me less than giving everybody a fleishik lunch for Purim anyway. But it was something really nice that we stumbled upon. And I think that's going to be the gist of today's call, or today's conversation, is really talking about, we've heard all these buzzwords when we're talking about the virus. We're talking about a new normal. Someone's already spoken about pivoting. These are unprecedented times. Like, if I have to hear that phrase one more time, we're coming out of a cave, the tunnel, the bright light. We've heard it all before. But what I want to claim is that in terms of Jewish education, actually the pandemic has not uncovered anything new. It may have exacerbated a whole lot of pre-existing conditions, but I haven't yet to see one new thing emerge, problem or issue emerge in Jewish education that wasn't there before. Day schools were always expensive. Teachers were never well trained. We were always lagging behind in digital. And there are some people that actually claim that the pandemic has shown nothing new. I tend to disagree in terms of health and some aspects of education. But in general, in Jewish education, I don't believe anything is actually new. But it might have taken a pandemic to shine a light on those things which we actually think always should have been shined a light on. And maybe now the community is brave enough, mature enough, or scared enough to be able to sit down, reset, reflect on what's actually a priority for us or them, however we refer to the Jewish community or communities, and say this is a moment to actually do what we always thought was right. Which brings me up to the next part, which is, it might not be just the problems were always there. It might have been that the solutions were always there as well, and just we didn't have the wherewithal to attract, to address them adequately. Or, as might be the case, in the early 2000s, and I think we're still recovering from this, is the community actually went along approach of, in order to solve a problem, we needed to start a new 501c3. That was the innovation approach in a time of absolute abundance and wealth. And some of you might have been the beneficiaries of that whole gestalt as well. And maybe now we're looking at the economy or the Jewish ecosystem, saying we actually overpopulated the Jewish ecosystem. And what we actually now need to look at is an era of consolidation and collaboration, rather than giving everybody who has a good idea the wherewithal to set up their own business. Anyway, all it comes to say, if the problems were known in advance, I want to suggest that some of the solutions were known in advance. And I just identify 4 or 5 of these solutions, which I think are really obvious. And to relate it to the Pasuk, we were put on this earth to deal with these issues. And in some ways, Mordechai, the pandemic might have been our Mordechai. So the pandemic is the one giving us the uts to actually do it, or making us feel icky enough to have to act, or giving us permission. However you want to see Mordechai, Corona might have seemed like be the proxy for this type of push in our life. There are more generous ways of looking at it. Some people say, yes, this could be the federation system, which is the Mordechai, or the foundations, which are like the funder is the Mordechai, whoever it is, we now have permission. So look, number one, and some of you have said this before, digital is here to stay. Now, I don't know about this. Like, I don't know any Jewish educator who said digital was never part of their plan. And they might not have called it digital. They would have called it new technologies. There are great articles that people read about the time the first pencil was introduced into the schooling system as the greatest technology ever to transform. And you might remember Little House on the Prairie when they first introduced the chalkboard, how that was going to completely destroy education. Anyway, digital is here to stay, and it's not to say it's the only thing, because all of us know that it's going to be a hybrid approach, and that digital can be used and it can't be used. But digital is always a strategy, never the ends itself, but maybe it's a means to an ends. We all know that. But maybe now all those people who are so scared of it, who are running away from it as like it was the be all, like it was going to be the disaster, have now taken pause to say, actually, it can be used to the benefit. So number one is digital is here to stay. Number two, family education is here to stay. And I'm not talking about family education anymore for early childhood kids. I'm talking about families for the first time. I have been watching my kids learn. Now, it might not be in the classroom, but now I can actually cognitively what's going through my kid's head as the teacher is beginning to try and explain something to them. I'm now part of that process. And that's obvious for any of us who now are sitting here saying, okay, Jewish education has to involve the family, and the family is not the enemy. The parent is not the one who has to be seen as the drop-off, never to see the kid again. The parent is not dropping the kid off at Hebrew school to punish the kid, although in some cases we might hear those stories which are grossly exaggerated, as Michael and I were privy to the other day, and grossly outdated. But parents are our partners. Like, huge chidush there, huge newness for us Jewish educators. We always knew that families were an integral part of Jewish education. But the part 2B for this family education, which I think is critical, and anyone who's able to crack this nut is going to be a multi-Jewish educator millionaire, or the equivalent thereof, is that overnight we actually ensured that an entire generation of grandparents became technologically literate. We thought it couldn't be done. And yet all of a sudden we now have grandparents now involved in Jewish education and Jewish engagement as well. So for me, now that we're accepting that digital is here to stay, the family can be part of the process. Grandparents should be included, not excluded or seen as the funder of Jewish education. A whole new world of possibility has actually opened up for us. It relates to a silly point, which, now, how old is my son? Amy, how old is my son? He's 11, right? So
11 and a half.
11 and a
actually.
half, right? Coming up, we're planning a bar mitzvah. Amy and I have a connection story, which is slightly irrelevant, but meaningful in many ways. My son's bris was Skyped live to Australia. And at that point in time, 11 and a half years ago, that was big news. It was so big, it actually made the front page of the Jewish Week in New York. It's like this revolutionary way to actually have Jewish rituals go live all around the world. Unbelievable. Like, this is now so normative and mainstream. It's not going back. And like, no one's ever going to claim that Shiva after someone has passed should be only virtual. But surely people are going to continue to embrace some of these practices moving forward, because all of a sudden, socially distanced doesn't mean socially disconnected. In fact, it actually means connected in ways more than before. And I use that as a bit of a metaphor because I just think that the access to all of this stuff that technology has provided, it's not about the technology. It's the understanding that ritual does not have to be confined to a certain place, a certain time, the way it's done in a certain way. I do think there's something important about this technology, which is important, which is also exacerbated. Again, pre-existing condition, pre-existing solution, but maybe now we have the wherewithal to focus on it. The accessibility, inclusivity, and affordability of Jewish education has not been good enough for too long. And maybe the pandemic has now shined a light on the fact that we need to deal with these three issues. Now, I don't want to really get into the discussion, although if you want to take it there about racial equity or inequity in the Jewish community, I think it's important. I think last summer shined a light on the racial inequities in America as a whole. But when I talk to my staff about inclusivity, I'm not talking just about Jews of color. Because it's not as if we scored so well on inclusivity of other groups, Jews with disabilities, LGBTQ, we might get better than some groups, immigrant populations. I mean, it's not as if we've checked off all the other boxes and now all of a sudden we're ready to include Jews of color. We have a huge systemic problem of inclusivity, accessibility, and affordability. And one of the biggest problems, by the way, I believe, is affordability. In order to be a good Jew today, whatever that means, and I don't mean to be disparaging of bad Jews because they don't exist, but of a good Jew, it's an expensive proposition. You either go to day school or summer camp, or you're a synagogue member, or you keep kosher, or you have a glorious bar mitzvah, or you go to Israel. But to be Jewish is it's not a free, nor should it be, but it's not a free enterprise. It actually costs, and therefore by cost, it actually excludes. So when I talk about inequities, I'm talking about accessibility, affordability, and inclusivity on all levels. And maybe the pandemic has shined a light, which has now said, now is the time for us to address all of these issues. I've mentioned so far digital, I've mentioned rituals, I've mentioned families. I want to mention knowledge and content or Torah for a second. At the beginning of the pandemic, there were lots of articles written about what we need to be doing now as Jewish educators is focusing on connections, social, emotional well-being, mental health. I believe all of that, by the way. I think it's really important. And if Jewish education could do one thing really well and has done one thing really well over the past 12 months, it's ensured that those people that already had pre-existing connections have maintained connected with their populations. Really, really important. But I was in conversation the last couple of weeks ago with Rabbah Yaffa Epstein, who's now at Wexner, and she pointed out something to me, which is like, oh, shubers, maybe I've got something wrong here. What happens if technology was actually not really good at any of that? And what it was really good at was the direct transmission of content and knowledge. And what happens if after the pandemic, we recognize that what synagogues and schools and shuls and mikvahs were really good at doing was actually the social connection part in person, but we need to be now leveraging technology for dissemination of knowledge. And everybody who had balked away from knowledge as being a central part of Jewish experience now realize that we actually have something valuable added. So for any of you who's in a Hebrew school, what would happen now if all of our knowledge transmission went online efficiently, effectively, and affordably? But what the synagogue now focused on was like tikkun olam, social action, community, tefillah, and all those other things, which are usually called soft Jewish skills and not the hard Jewish skills. And what happens if the whole Jewish education enterprise was actually flipped? Now, I don't know what that looks like, but all I know is that if now I understand that I can actually teach a B'nai Mitzvah kid how to recite the brachot and the maftir for their bar mitzvah in about 6 to 8 weeks rather than 4 years, I've just freed up 4 years of education for things that might actually really matter in that kid's life. Maybe the pandemic has given us time to pause and to reflect and to think about these problems and some solutions moving forward that other times in history have not been able to give us the opportunity to do. So I just mentioned 5, right? Digital, ritual, families, knowledge, inclusivity. But I do want to mention something which is really important because us Jewish educators have been tasked to do something really, really strange. Save the present and plan for the future. Yeah. So all of us have been working our butts off in the last 12 months to try and make sure that the people that we serve are serviced. Give them what they need, what they think they need, answer whatever they need. And then at the same time, people are saying, but make sure you plan for a new normal. Make sure you plan for a new future. And I want to probably suggest to all of you that it's impossible to do both simultaneously and equally. It's impossible to both focus on the present and to plan for the future without one contaminating each other. It's a different mindset. I ended up doing my stuff. I ended up dividing them into two. I said, you service the current people, you plan for the future. Don't talk to each other. I have the luxury of doing so in an organization like mine. Not all of you have that luxury, but just don't beat yourselves up that it's really hard to do both simultaneously. But to finish, I want to just show one thing and then really hear your interpretations, your reactions, or anything that I've said or have over exaggerated. I want to introduce you to the 3-box solution for innovation. It's by this guy called Vijay Govindarajan. Apologies for butchering his name. And I urge you to have a look at this material. I can send you some links afterwards. He says that there are 3 aspects of innovation. What we're talking about today is change and innovation and planning for the future. He says there are 3 boxes. Box 1, the present. Manage the core business to its peak profitability, right? Do what you do well and do it really well. Double down on what you do really well. Box 3, he says, is the future. So all of us know what to do with the future. We brainstorm, we design, think, we do all this imagination, what the future can possibly be like. And he said the problem with innovation in the world today, especially in the nonprofit sector, but not just, has been that we focus on number 1, double down on what we do really well. We know we have to do number 3, imagine a new possibility for the future. So imagine what Pesach is going to look like post-pandemic. And the first question I asked you, what are you going to keep from Purim? Like, what's something radical that you stumbled upon? What, the apple falling on your head or the lightning bolt, whatever? What's the new thing? He says, where we all fall down is none of us ever want to consider box number 2. And he basically says box number 2 is getting rid of all the stuff that you've been doing for years and years that was never working in the first place. And for whatever reason, nostalgia, memory, institutional memory, one donor likes it, whatever reason, we always hold on to something in box number 2. And Vijay goes on to say that if you don't acknowledge box number 2 and do something about it, number 1 becomes really difficult and number 3 becomes irrelevant. Because it's not as if someone has said to you, now innovate, and here's an extra $1 million to innovate. You're playing with the same pool of money, you're often playing with the same staff as well. But he basically says that box 2 is what frees you up to be able to do number 3 and number 1. And I think part of the message that I wanted to give you today is when we imagine the future of Jewish education, we've also got to get real with ourselves about the present and the past. In order to be able to do so, we need to create times for ourselves to be able to say what actually wasn't working. The big caveat with that is that now is not the time to turn to your staff and tell them or ask them the question, what hasn't been working for the last 12 years of your life? Please don't do that. Our staff have been heroic. They have been amazing. You all have been unbelievable in the jobs that you've been doing. We use the word heroes. We throw it around a lot, but I don't use it lightly at all. So make sure you just don't throw at them and say, what have you been doing for the last year that sucked? Don't ask that question, right? But somewhere you need to find the time and the mental energy to be real and to be true for yourselves, because without acknowledging number 2, any future-oriented thinking is all at best l'shamayim, but in reality is never going to actually happen because you're not freed enough from the past to be able to focus on the future. So the message for today was twofold. One is, you've all been put in these positions for a reason. I have no doubt about it that you are the Esthers of Jewish education. And I don't mean that as a gendered thing. I mean it as the true piece, that you are here for a purpose. You might not have realized it until now, but this is why you're here. 2, we need to plan for a brighter tomorrow because the current day it's 11 months in and this thing sucks. But in order to plan for a brighter tomorrow, we also might need to get real with ourselves and acknowledge what was working and what wasn't working beforehand, because going back to normal, I don't believe is the way forward. We really need to create a new paradigm because the world has changed around us, and shame on us if we don't recognize the fact that the world is completely changing right now. What are we going to be able to do to update and to change ourselves accordingly? So I'll pause there and would love to have conversation with you for the next 10 minutes or so. So that's a lot of stuff to throw at you, but let's chat. Let's talk.
Great. Amazing, David. Thank you. Really well said. Well done. And I see all the little hand claps coming. So thank you. Very much appreciated. So I really do want to just open it up. And I think that what David has put out to us is very, very anchoring to sort of push us to think about where are we and who are we as leaders, and what do we want to see for our families, for our institutions, for ourselves, for our staff. So I really do want to just open it up, and whoever's ready to unmute and respond and react.
Hi, I'm Kim. I'm at Temple Shalom in Newton. The things that you said about the realities of what are here to stay totally resonate with me. And I wanted to just talk a little bit about the family education piece. I feel like I have noticed families engaging in really profound ways. And I wonder about what you and the other people in the group are thinking about how to maintain that when we are back in person. I think when they're home and they're in that space, it's easy for them and they see the importance. My wonder is, over time, do you see, what are the pieces we can put in place to help them to remember how relevant it is and how impactful?
It's a great question. I mean, again, I don't have the answers. And by the way, if anyone wants to challenge me on any of this, I'm like, these are. I'm using this as a bit of a forum to test out some ideas as well. So please feel free to push back. I would say, look, one of the problems with the Purim story is the fact that we have treated it as a pediatric narrative for so many years, and that it's become a pediatric holiday. And clearly, when you look into it, there's a lot more to it than that. And I would say the same. No offense to anybody. But family education has also fallen into the same bucket of being seen as something that you do for little kids, as a means, and the skeptics would say as a means to actually get the adults involved, the parents involved. That's not even so skeptical, because some places explicitly say that. But I think we just need to reimagine it, and ask yourself the question of not what, and this is about all Jewish education, by the way, not why family education is important to my congregation or to my school or to my institution. But by me offering a family education, how is it going to benefit the family? And the family going through a different life stage event and a life cycle, the kid who's going through something in 6th grade or 8th grade doesn't need the same thing that a preschool kid and family is going through. So if we stop asking the question of why Jewish education is good for, I put it this way, Jewish education should never be about making you more Jewish. It should never be about making the Jewish institution stronger. It shouldn't even be about making the Jewish people better. Jewish education, to be successful in the 21st century, has to help people where they're at in their lives, help make the communities they live in more thriving and more successful, and help make the world a better place. I mean, that's the non-Orthodox, maybe even the Orthodox version of what Jewish education is there for. Because the sixth thing that I didn't mention, and I'll always finish off with this, is saying the reason why Jewish education has been unable to adapt has got nothing to do with digital or it's been asking the wrong questions for too long. The right questions, the right outcomes are what's going to drive the answers, Kim, to your questions. And if you honestly believe that family education is out there to serve the families, you'll stumble across all the right things yourself. And then the hard part for Jewish educators to stomach is Jewish education is in service of the families, not in service of Jewish education. But once you crack that nut of saying what part of Jewish text, tradition, values, wisdom can help the families thrive, you'll come to the answers yourselves. And by the way, the families will come to it with you. They'll come to you with those answers as well. So it's a great question, but I think you're getting at the essence of all of this. Barbara. Hi.
Well, I think the reason that family education has been so well received on the digital end is that the parents have had to put so much into it, right? Like, we've given our parents so much more tools to actually be the educators and be the teachers. And if we can translate that into in-person things, I think it will go a huge way, that they take the responsibility as well.
Yeah. The part which I'm not, the part about Kim's question and Barbara's response here, which I'm not certain about, I've got no crystal ball here, is as soon as we're allowed to get back in person together, are we going to do it automatically? Right. And I find it really hard to believe that a family that's traveling an hour each way to come to Hebrew school, or trying to squeeze Hebrew school into all of the other things in their life, is going to give it the same time now that they know we can do it much more efficiently, maybe even more effectively through online instruction. So your hardcore members, they'll come back. But if I'm given the choice between a 2-hour experience online where I actually learn more, as opposed to everything else, and because you know what, I didn't really care about Mincha anyway. it's going to be an interesting piece of the equation, which we don't know the answer to. So I think all of these things are going to become real issues that Jewish educators are going to face. Look, will summer camps go back to being exactly like summer camps have always been? Probably, because they rest on nostalgia and they rest on memory as being the core part of their business. But don't forget, summer camps were only ever attracting 7 to 10% of the Jewish population anyway. So they weren't perfect for everybody for a whole lot of reasons. So we can get lulled into a false sense of security as well. Can we think of new ways to engage more people?
Yeah, but David, I think you just said that, right? Like it's Jewish education, there's no one size fits all. And the pandemic has really shone the light on that, right? Like that we've had to really think of different ways to reach different families and different kids in different ways. And that's
Yeah.
important to take away also at the end.
Really important. No silver bullet. No single silver bullet.
And just to add to that, I think that having a lens into their homes, to be able to see parents walking by, Miriam, we saw her, I don't know who was walking by, but like you have that, and you have a better sense of who your kids are and the things that that drive them and their families. And I think people are involved in, it's just, I think that informal nature has really helped to elevate everything we've done to really build those stronger connections, which doesn't happen when we're in person or as organically anyway.
I know we're running out of time, but anyone brave enough to announce something that they're willing to drop? We've been doing it for so long, but it's actually box 2 material.
So this isn't exactly what you're asking for, David, but some of us are in a group that gathers once a week to talk about education and what do we do as religious school directors. And one of the things that we've been talking about is one of the components that many of us are thinking about continuing next year is keeping Hebrew online and then having other things in person. And that when you talked about that knowledge, content, Torah concept, like, you know, the in-person parts are going to be when we're doing mitzvah day and doing social action and doing tefillah and praying together. And you're right, we can teach someone to have a bar mitzvah in 6 months and we can do it all online like this.
We're thinking about doing an online direct-to-consumer Jewish out-school type model, and I'm convinced that teaching Hebrew online will be a great incorporation. But I'm convinced that the real deal breaker or the real disruptor would be if we started offering a 6-week course on how to write your Dvar Torah online. Like that would destabilize the whole synagogue enterprise, right? But it's worth us considering. Any one of us who studied the history of Hebrew school, synagogues were never developed to be schools, right? And maybe if synagogues, if they did really, really great spirituality and really great prayer and maybe really great social action, maybe that's what synagogues were placed on this earth to be. Ask yourself the same question for JCCs. What would they really develop to actually be? But now we have a chance to explore these questions. Just remember what I said about it's sometimes the way you say something is as important as what you're actually saying as well. And if you come to your staff or your colleagues with the notion that if you don't innovate, you're going to die, which is a phrase that I used to use a lot, it's actually not very inspiring. It's actually quite threatening. So try to work out a way where you can phrase that we need to change because the world, nothing to do with you. The world has just completely changed, and therefore we need to be inspired to change along with it rather than any condemnation on what they've done up until now, because the tone actually does really matter in this discussion as well. I hope you can appreciate that I'm coming to you as colleagues in that generosity of spirit, rather than, I actually don't know most of the work that you do, so I'm not even challenging on that front as well. Michael, yeah.
David, I wanted to ask you about something that was happening early on, but I'm not sure if it's still around, and I wanted to get your view on it, which is the idea of a religious awakening. There was a real sense of the numbers tripling, quadrupling at the beginning, particularly around services and then educational programming. And as we've heard, people who would not have been involved in religious education were coming into the picture. And, we have obviously historical precedents for religious awakenings after pandemics of some sort or another. Just wondering if you think there's anything of that left, or is that just kind of gone away?
I don't know. So what didn't happen? Here's what didn't happen is that all of a sudden people that were unaffiliated to congregations, they didn't start flocking in mass to these hyper religious activities that were now being offered online. Now they did flock en masse to, if you remember back to Pesach last year, the third Seder pop culture Passover extravaganza. People with unaffiliations did flock to that, but I'm not sure that's religious awakening, right? That's like a cultural awakening of the 93% of Jews who are proud in America of being Jewish. Look, Michael's question is an ongoing discussion. Religion in America is really struggling right now. It was struggling before the pandemic, and it's struggling during the pandemic. And it's struggling for a whole lot of generational reasons, and it's struggling for a whole lot of institutional reasons. And it's mainly struggling because Gen Z and Gen Y don't trust authority. And religion is quintessential authority. Whether we can create a whole new genre of rabbi clergy who can deal with this transition, that's the big challenge amongst all of us. But Michael's question is hidden in the fact that I'm not sure there's a religious revival going on now. I do think, however you want to define it, there is a spiritual awakening going on now, where people are wanting to be more connected with themselves, with their communities, with the transcendent, however you want to define that. That is happening. But I don't think it's necessarily happening in the constructs of religion as we may have understood them previously. And there's no quantifiable way to describe that because we're actually creating new definitions. Jews don't like talking about spirituality. Michael, you know this. Michael taught me this. They do have other language to describe it. I work a lot with teenagers, so male teenagers really don't like the concept of spirituality. But when you ask the right question, you can see that they're really going through the same question. So I think there's a language problem, which might be part of the problem, Michael, is that as a Jewish community, I don't think we've created a strong enough language to offer people the ability to express how they feel about or want to communicate about many of these things. They definitely don't articulate them in public. So I don't think there's necessarily going to be a religious awakening, but I'd go for a spiritual awakening first. And by the way, being Jewish is not just a religion, and that's also what we're seeing as well. I mean, we all know this again. We all know that, right? But if the only leadership we offer are clergy, rabbis, and synagogue life, then we're automatically alienating large parts of the population. So that's, again, it's a sociological data point. We all know, we just haven't been able to fully crack how to access these people as well.
I wanted to build on that because something that you just said, David, really sparked me thinking about, I think one of the sort of big gray clouds right now that people are feeling is sort of like wanting to burst through that gray cloud of reconnecting with people, being back in person. And I think if our programs don't think about what that means and what that can look like, and along the same lines of what you were just saying, David, that it shouldn't be, from my opinion, let's all come into the sanctuary and have the cantor and rabbi up on the bima and, we'll get back to normal. To think really deeply about how we can help our communities become the best that they can be once they can be back in person, because I think people are craving that. And if we don't step up with some interesting ways to make that happen, asking the right questions, I think that's going to be a missed opportunity and something for us to be thinking about.
Can I just say, I know coming to time, it's really important. Like the day when 100% of the population is vaccinated, right? Like things aren't just going to suddenly come back to the way that they were. Firstly, 100% is never going to be whatever. But I just want all of you just to think for 1 second. And I don't know what all of you do in your real jobs, right? But let's assume that you're all these educators that have been working, or community professionals, for 11 months now, without stop, without much break. You're all exhausted, you're all stressed, you're all dealing with your people like on an ongoing basis because that would make you actually normal in our field. The day that we see the end of the tunnel, like, what do you need? Like, you actually need a rest. Like, you need a break. You can't keep going the way you've been going and on day new one just pick up as if nothing has happened. And I'm extremely concerned about the burnout that people might be feeling now. But if the expectation is on September 1 that you start all of a sudden the next academic year as if nothing has taken place and nothing has changed and you haven't had a chance to recharge, like I think that impact on the field is going to be really, really devastating. So for all of you, as much as I can talk to you about your heroics, and my definition of a hero is someone who puts other people above themselves, and I think educators fall into that category across the board. How are you seriously going to take care of yourselves, and how are you going to ensure that you're ready for the next part of this? I don't know, I hate war metaphors, but the next part of this battle, you're going to be able to fight with full energy, because I think that's a real challenge. So schedule your time off, schedule your mental breaks, schedule your own self-care, because for me, if I'm to predict anything, that's the inevitable obvious, that there's going to be a massive burnout when we least need it. So I know it's hard, but it's going to be much harder if we don't do it. So take care of yourselves, please.
Fantastic message, David. Really beautiful. I have to run quickly this morning, so I'm going to close us very shortly, but I just want to really thank David for sharing these very important thoughts with us, helping us to sort of think about the 3 boxes. And perhaps we can continue the conversation about that box too in some of our other venues. Really, thank you so much. And I just, for myself, it dawned on me this weekend that, oh my goodness, I haven't had a vacation since last January, which is kind of remarkable in my entire professional career to have gone this long without a real break. So yes, I wish for all of us the wherewithal to find the time and space to have our own breaks and to provide that for our staffs as well. So thank you. I put the dates of the upcoming sessions in the chat. April 12th, we'll have Jonathan Krasna and Sarah Ben-Or talking about their book, Hebrew Infusion, about the lessons from the camping world on Hebrew Infusion that we might want to bring into our world. And then our last session will be on May 24th with Miriam Heller-Stern, who will bring us some ideas about where creativity can and should live in our work and in our lives. Please make a note already if you can. On May 24th, we're going to do the session at 11 a.m. Miriam is on the West Coast and asked that we do that. So I hope that that's doable for everybody. So wishing everybody a great week. Again, David, thank you so much. So much to think about, so much for us to be planning for, thinking about, working on every day, both for the present and the future, and to identify those things in the past that we really should be saying goodbye to. So thanks a lot, everybody, and hope to see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
David.
Thanks, everybody. See you later. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Great. All right. I got to run. So see you soon. Are you going to join us, Michael, at SAR? You're muted.